I actually found Jesus Ayala, Jesus Jimenez, and Jesus Garcia. They were all in my cell. And
tell us who you are. What makes you tick? Being a good mom is very important to me, and a good wife, and a good worker, and being all those things together is not easy. So I'm basically a ticking time bomb. And I went through a lot of years of this kind of hard stuff, and I was going to murder him. I was going to kill him, like the scriptures say, like Nephi killed him, just to stop the pain and to stop him coming after me and to stop him coming after my children.
Regardless of its Christian veneer, the basic tenets of Mormonism are in direct conflict with biblical Christianity. The following piece of animation, based directly on actual Mormon publications, highlights these major doctrinal differences.
Mormonism teaches that trillions of planets scattered throughout the cosmos are ruled by countless gods who once were human like us. They say that long ago on one of these planets, to an unidentified god and one of his goddess wives, a spirit child named Elohim was conceived. This spirit child was later born to human parents who gave him a physical body. Through obedience to Mormon teaching and death and resurrection, he proved himself worthy and was elevated to godhood as his father before him. Mormons believe that Elohim is their heavenly father, and that he lives with his many goddess wives on a planet near a mysterious star called Kora. Here, the God of Mormonism and his wives, through endless celestial sex, produced billions of spirit children.
Is their heavenly father, and that he lives with his many goddess wives on is their heavenly father, and that he lives with his many goddess wives on
names and stuff.
No, ma'am.
No.
You're not going to decide the outcome of this. We will decide, and we'll let you know how everything's going to happen here, okay?
Shocking body camera video shows the arrest of self-proclaimed prophet and fundamentalist church leader Samuel Bateman after investigators found him illegally transporting underage girls in a trailer.
How old are you? 14. How old are you? 11? How old are you? 12? You? How old are you?
It happened on August 28th in Flagstaff, Arizona.
She's known by. She just turned 16 on December 23rd, lived in Jefferson County with her mom, who has full legal custody of her, and her siblings. She's been missing since New Year's Day. She took off in her mother's Honda Civic, abandoned the car at a gas station with a note saying that she was fine and that she was safe. And then her mom was able to retrieve that vehicle, but that is the last communication that Elizabeth Roundy has had with her daughter. I'm Nate Eaton, and since January, we've been following this story. And tonight, we're going to talk more about Elantra Fisher, where she could be, but also how this situation apparently is not that abnormal when it comes to the FLDS and polygamous families. In fact, one expert that I'll speak with tonight tells me that children, thousands of them potentially, are scattered across the Western states away from their parents. They've been separated because the leaders of the church have deemed it so. Elizabeth says it's human trafficking, it's child trafficking, and that it's happening more and more, and something needs to be done to stop it.
Colorado City. This is the city where the fundamentalist families live. So if we're gonna find any sister wives, it's gonna be right here on their home turf. Okay, lucky for me, I got my sister to drive me around this really kind of creepy fundamentalist town. And when I say creepy, I don't really mean it in a disparaging way. It's just, there's something really unsettling about this place. I don't know, Warren Jeffs was the leader of the fundamentalist Latter-day Saints community in this town, and I guess he was known for taking brides as young as, I don't know, 13 or something. You can look it up online. It was crazy. He was busted back in 2006 for, well, basically pimping out young girls. So...
Joseph Smith used the doctrine of divine revelation to legitimize the taking of many wives and spiritualized it as an essential doctrine of his Mormon religion. In addition to his first wife Emma, Smith appears to have actively enjoyed at least 27 other wives, many of whom were already married. His first plural wife was a barely pubescent teenage relative who was living in their home at the time. Polygamy became a standard requirement of Mormonism, necessary for entrance into the highest level of heaven, referred to by Mormons as the celestial kingdom. Brigham Young, successor to Joseph Smith and second prophet of the Mormon Church, vigorously proclaimed that the only men who become gods, even the sons of God, are those who enter into polygamy. Mormon scripture still says that those who abide not in this doctrine shall be damned.
Giant two-story house with its own fenced-in basketball court and a stone wall around it to keep out prying eyes. I mean, that's the kind of spot where you want to raise your polygamous family right there. Except for the fact that there's no second floor patio or balcony there, so you would just fall right out the door. That's weird. Wow, look at this place. It looks like they're still working on it. Oh, look, it says Zion over the door. I'm not sure you saw that. That's the Mormon name for utopia, or heaven, I guess. Look at this guy.
Those Mormons who were sealed in the eternal marriage ceremony expect to become polygamous gods in the celestial kingdom, rule over other planets, and spawn new families throughout eternity. The Mormons thank God for Joseph Smith, who claimed that he had done more for us than any other man, including Jesus Christ. The Mormons believe that he died as a martyr, shed his blood for us, so that we too may become gods.
So that we too may become gods.
So your understanding was Chad stayed at Lori's house in Arizona?
That's right.
Do you know if Charles was present during that?
I believe he was out of town.
Do you know if Charles and Lori were still married at that point?
They were.
Do you know if Chad was still married at that point?
Yes, he was.
Do you recall Lori telling you anything in November regarding she and Chad's relationship?
Yes.
And what did she tell you?
She told me that they had been married, I believe, 4 or 5 times. And she would go into different details with me about who she was, what character she was, and what character he was.
Do you recall if she said anything to you about going to the temple?
Yes.
And what did she tell you regarding going to the temple?
She would tell me that, yes, that weekend that he came to Arizona, that they met in the temple together, and they were somewhere in there, like in just like maybe a waiting area room, that they were sealed together by, I believe Moroni was there, and possibly, I believe she said Jesus Christ, and that that relationship they had multiple lives, it was kind of like a reunited again. They got to be sealed there. It wasn't in a sealing room officially done by the church or anything like that.
And can you explain a little bit about the relevance of being sealed?
The teachings of our church talk about when you're sealed to a companion on this earth, that you are sealed for time and all eternity.
And when you say the teachings of our church, are you comfortable sharing what church you're a member of?
The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Ed Decker is a former high-ranking Mormon who spent 19 years in the church before having his eyes opened to such anti-biblical heresies.
Among the Mormon temple rituals is the practice of baptism for the dead, when their dead are called up to convert to Mormonism. During these ceremonies, many Mormons have had exhilarating and even frightening encounters with apparitions or spirit beings inside the temple. Former Mormon prophet Wilford Woodruff admitted to being surrounded by the dead at one point while inside the temple, and warned that the dead will seek out others who enter the temple. Joseph Smith was a sorcerer and practiced crystal ball gazing or fortune telling, and was
that they were sealed together by, I believe Moroni was there, and possibly, I believe she said Jesus Christ, and that relationship they had multiple lives, it was kind of like a reunited again.
That if we are to attain the highest degree of glory, that we must do the works of Abraham. Therefore, we were taught that in order to attain the celestial glory, a man must take more than one wife.
There's also the warning that any person who will not believe this and enter into polygamous temple marriages, they shall be destroyed.
So the pressure was on always for men to marry several women. That was one of the prerequisites to godhood.
I was in the Mormon church for 11 years, never missed my tithing once. I had a temple recommend. And then the Lord showed me how that they had departed from the original track that Joseph and Brigham had set it out on. They passed a law that a man could only have one wife, and actually it's the order of heaven for a man to have more than one wife.
Are you involved in fertile marriage now?
Yeah.
The youngest girls were reserved exclusively for the older men that would have a harder time securing more wives. So that's how they worked it. And my father, he got most of his wives by bribing other men with his daughters. I was one of the ones that refused to fall into that, and I chose my own husband and married and had a very loving relationship for 15 years, and until I lost them through this blood atonement process.
Graves from the Short Creek days. None of these look like pioneer graves. These all look like fresh graves. See how there's like mounds of dirt? Like these people were freshly buried. Why are there so many fresh graves here? Did a bunch of people just die? It's almost like they just had an epidemic or something here. It's creepy. Okay, so there is this monument in the middle of the cemetery, and it has this really interesting sign here. I'm going to freeze on it, so if you want to read the whole thing, be my guest, you can pause the video, but basically it just talks about the fundamentalist church has repeatedly defended religious freedom guaranteed by the First Amendment. Persecution of its members for their religious beliefs and practices was evident in state and federal raids in 1935, 44, and 53. In the 1953 raid, the mothers and young children were evacuated en masse.
Of crazy dynamics in that family back then, and it caused a lot of issues right away, and it actually made me scared and nervous.
How so?
And we thought about because there was a lot of inappropriate sexual touching and things going on in the family, particularly between him and his sister.
So between Alex and Lori?
And Lori.
Okay. You kind of got me at a loss on this one. What do you consider inappropriate sexual touching?
Like they were simulating sex acts, and which is not normal to me for a brother and a sister. For example, he would pick her up and she'd wrap her legs around his waist, and he would kind of bounce her up and down on himself.
Okay.
In front of me, and they would moan and simulate sex acts. And I have brothers, and I would never act like that with one of my brothers.
Okay.
And his mom and dad talked about their sex life in front of us constantly, and it just kind of seemed to be a game for them.
Oh,
to
the
talk
mom and
about
dad
their...
didn't really object to it then, huh?
No, not at all. All of this was going on in the family, in front of everybody. They had no shame.
Okay. So that obviously was kind of an alarm for you, I'm assuming, during your marriage.
Yeah.
And did it continue? Was it more than one time that you saw it?
Yeah, it was just about every time we were with them. Now, Alex and I only lived together married for about 4 or 5 months. And then I just knew that family was too weird, that I had made a big mistake. And so I got out.
Developing now, a man known for helping police solve cold cases finds himself on the other side of the law. Booking records show that 47-year-old Jared Leisek faces charges of rape of a child in Utah. Leisek is the founder of the diving group Adventures with Purpose. They go into waterways to look for clues in unsolved cases. The alleged incidents that he's facing charges for happened in 1992.
Guys, there is a sister wife. We finally found a sister wife. Look. She's standing outside this bathroom at a rest area. She was just talking on her cell phone, but look, that's what I was talking about. Those puffy sleeves. Look, here comes her sister wife mom. It's either her mom or her sister. Holy wow, I told you guys they're real. This is at a rest area, considerable way down the highway from Colorado City, but I'm glad we didn't give up.
Boy Scouts of America organization is going through bankruptcy as it faces lawsuits from more than 80,000 former Scouts who say they were sexually abused by Scout leaders.
Yeah, but a $250 million offer from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was just rejected by a judge. ABC4 Northern Utah correspondent Kate Garner joining us live to break down these details for us tonight. Kate.
Glenn, this all started about 2.5 years ago in February 2020 when the Boy Scouts of America initially started the process for bankruptcy. Now, this all began because of those 80,000 something allegations against them. But this case is super hard to follow because there are so many other parties involved. A lawyer tells me there are partners, there are insurance companies, and there are even churches that are involved in this case.
I've come this far. I'm not bowing out now.
Anthony Mandich is one of 80,000 former Boy Scouts who says he was sexually abused by Scout leaders.
I feel like my whole life, it's kind of like I've never lived up to my potential because I kind of feel like I don't deserve to live up to my potential.
Mandich felt like that for more than 40 years, all because he was keeping a secret.
In my experience growing up, you don't talk about things like that. Like, I would get beat up.
He says shortly after joining Cub Scouts, his leader, a member of the LDS Church, began abusing him.
I want to apologize to the court in the state of Arizona for what's brought me here.
It's our top story at 10. Paul Peterson, the former Maricopa County assessor, sentenced to another 5 years behind bars for running that illegal adoption scheme involving women from the Marshall Islands. It's a case we've been following for more than a year.
And tonight, finally, a sense of justice for those victims. ABC 15's Ashley Paredes walking us through how we got here.
Peterson was charged in Arkansas, Utah, and here in Arizona, all surrounding that illegal adoption scheme. Our state is second to hand out a sentence, bringing the former county official to a total of 11 years in prison so far. In an Arizona courtroom, former Maricopa County assessor Paul Peterson in an orange jumpsuit awaiting his fate.
Serve a sentence of an additional 5 years in the Arizona Department of Corrections.
Peterson illegally bringing dozens of mothers from the Marshall Islands to America, offering up their babies for adoption for tens of thousands of dollars.
So we anticipate that we'll have other arrests to make in this case.
Would you mind riding in the back of a police car?
Men and women allege David Hamblin used positions of power as a father, a therapist, a neighbor, and as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to ritualistically abuse children. He was arrested Wednesday morning, but investigators say he probably won't be the only one.
I have nothing to hide.
Until Hamblin's arrest, Fox 13 News chose not to identify any of the subjects of the investigation, but that did not stop Utah County Attorney David Leavitt from outing himself as a suspect in June and describing his relationship with Hamblin.
I prosecuted the therapist in Juab County for poaching a deer. He poached a deer to use for ritualistic purposes. This therapist was my elders quorum president in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He was my neighbor. I had a family connection.
During that same press conference, Leavitt described his accuser as tragically mentally ill. She's one of the same women who accused Hamblin and others.
Shame on you for doing that. It's uncalled for. He said tragically mentally ill woman 5 times. To attack their mental health status as a way to discredit them, and it was clear that that's what he was doing, and that's just not okay.
There is no organized ring of abuse. It was debunked.
But watch and listen. More than 2 years before that press conference, Leavitt sat down for a different interview and was asked if he thought ritualistic sex abuse was real. He went on to describe Hamblin and his own accuser, calling her a victim.
Do I think that occurs? Yeah, I think it occurs. I know some victims of it. Yeah, I know some victims of it. I was not in a position to prosecute it. Who was into Native American stuff, had killed deer and get deer hearts and drink their blood and drink the deer's blood.
At the time, Leavitt was under investigation by Homeland Security. These clips are now evidence in that case. We want to warn you, some of them are very graphic.
How do you train a dog to roll over when it's time to roll over? You know, you do it by giving a reward and repetition. If a man wants to program some little girl to give immoral sex anytime he wants to, you start young and give rewards. I mean, it's unfortunately, I've never, it's the same way you help a child learn how to make their bed.
Yesterday, after Hamblin's arrest, we asked David Leavitt through his spokesperson for a comment. We were told, no, he does not comment on pending cases. Apparently, that did not stop him in June. Reporting in studio tonight, Adam Herbets, Fox 13 News, Utah.
It was okay that Tylee stayed with Lori, but things gradually, slowly changed his mind. And I believe at one point we found out that Tylee had this pancreatic or some kind of condition. And
she had pancreatitis, yeah. She was at the Phoenix Children's Hospital, I believe.
Well, that was happening here too. And Lori was feeding her nothing but processed food. And Joe was just getting more and more concerned because it was now a health issue.
How do you train a dog to roll over when it's time to roll over? You do it by giving a reward and repetition.
I got to know her secondhand, I could tell that she exhibited some strange behavior. And I personally came to believe that there was something other than the truth motivating all this. And I believe I told you that this Mormonism that she has, and I'm not against Mormons or anything else, but she was a big believer in Mormonism. And I got to give you some context that when this was going on in 2007 in Travis County, or in Texas for that matter, out by Abilene, Texas, there was this sect, and it was called Warren Jeffs. And he had this place that was a Mormon city kind of. They were building it from scratch, and they had created this minor city with multiple people, hundreds of people that migrated there and built this Mormon, just say like Salt Lake City. You read the story about Salt Lake City, a bunch of Mormons felt, they were being prejudiced. So they all gathered and they went and created their own society someplace. Well, this place was a modern day version of that. And so knowing now that I was dealing with religion, and religion, when it starts interfering with law, gets rather scary. So I actually went out and purchased a number of books about Mormonism just to find out really what drives the religion. And I think I told you this, during this investigative stage, I got a phone call from the second person in charge of the Mormon church. No kidding, second person. He calls me up and vouches for her authenticity. And I'm like flabbergasted. How do you it'd be like getting the Pope to call me, or the bishop under the Pope or whatever, to call me about some disciple. And I was like, this is getting out of hand again.
This is during the second person in charge of the Mormon church. No kidding. Second person. He calls me up and vouches for her authenticity.
Trying to get the Mormons into the original doctrine that Brigham and Joseph had it set on. And I refused to give it up.
That's the reason why today people are still killing each other, shedding the blood so they can have forgiveness of sin. And it comes directly from Joseph Smith and from Brigham Young, the first two prophets of Mormonism.
I would just like you to know that if anything happens to me ever, or to my children, I will personally, I believe the Mormon Church in general will be responsible, because the very doctrine of blood atonement stems from Mormonism.
And John, Christina, we want to warn you, much of the evidence we were shown this morning was very graphic surrounding the deaths of Lori Vallow's two children, JJ and Tylee. And the testimony we heard from this Rexburg police detective was heavy, and we knew it was only going to get more difficult. But before the afternoon session could get underway, Vallow requested that she be excused from the rest of today's evidence portion, her lawyer citing fragile mental health and emotional day, but the judge denied her. Lori Vallow sat in court with her arms crossed, looking away from the projector screen. Another warning for viewers, what we had to see was extremely graphic. Photos of Lori's 7-year-old son, JJ Vallow, wrapped in duct tape across his arms and head with a plastic bag on his head that had to be cut off. Detective Ray Hermosillo described witnessing the body at the Ada County Coroner's Office in June of 2020, shortly after investigators discovered the remains of JJ and his big sister, 16-year-old Tylee Ryan, on the property of her husband, Chad Daybell. The jury looked at devastating images, some holding back tears, as we saw the shallow graves the kids were buried in and what was left of Tylee's remains. Hermosillo says a team of investigators between Rexburg Police and the FBI took turns digging because it was so hard to smell the charred bones and flesh covered in dirt. The detective also took the jury back through the investigation several months prior in late November 2019 when Rexburg PD served a search warrant at Lori's townhome. Police found empty closets with hangers and no one inside the apartment. They recovered weapons in the garage, including multiple rifles, a handgun, several rounds of ammunition, a ghillie suit, and Alex Cox's passport. Alex is Lori's dead brother and alleged co-conspirator along with Daybell.
And did you know Melanie Gibb before she came and joined you that at one time in Hawaii?
No, that was the first time I met her.
And was she, in her belief system, she was similar to Lori?
Yes.
From the statements that Melanie and Lori were telling you about their new beliefs, were Melanie and Lori on the same page with that?
Yes.
And they asked you to join?
I think it was kind of like a subtle grooming is how I would describe it, just kind of testing the water to see my reaction. But I could feel that the ultimate goal was to include me.
Okay. And your response was no thanks?
Not interested.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Mr. Archibald, that then concludes the cross-examination. Does the state have any redirect?
Very briefly, Your Honor.
Very well.
Sorry, adjusting it. Mr. Archibald's taller than I am. Ma'am, on cross-examination, you mentioned this group that she was a part of?
Yes.
Was it your understanding she was one of the leaders of this group?
I didn't know the hierarchy or the leadership that I'm referring to as being a leader in gathering the 144,000. The group that I'm referring to is the podcast group that was described to me.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that distinction is necessary.
Okay. This podcast group, who was in it?
The names that I was told were Zulema Pastenes, Melanie Gibb, Jason Mao, Thor, I don't remember his last name, Chad Daybell.
Okay. The individuals in this podcast group, were they also committed to this mission in helping form and pull together the 144,000?
That was my understanding of how it was explained to me, yes.
And that was explained to you by Lori Vallow?
Yes.
Nothing further. Thank you.
in order to gain access to the gold plates on which were written the Book of Mormon. After his death, Smith was found to be carrying a magic talisman on his person, sacred to Jupiter, designed to bring him wealth, power, and success in seducing women.
In Deuteronomy chapter 18, the Bible warns against participation in all witchcraft-related practices, since they can lead to spiritual deception and a rejection of the truth. There shall not be found among you anyone who practices witchcraft, or a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead, for all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord. John Heinerman, director of the Anthropological Research Center in Salt Lake City, is an active and devout Mormon who candidly admits to the Latter-day Saints' involvement in occultism.
I, as a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, am somewhat active in what is called the New Age movement. The New Age movement consisting of things like crystal gazing, channeling, pyramid power, and so forth and so on. People of the New Age movement are often more open to the truths of Mormonism, like the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith working with the Urim and Thummim, than conservative Christian folks who are mostly closed-minded to these things.
Although claiming to be a Christian religion, the Mormon Church does not display any crosses on any of its properties. However, the inverted pentagram, which is known to be the highest satanic symbol, is featured extensively on Mormon temples and other church structures. For those who may find it hard to believe that Mormonism has more in common with Satanism than Christianity, one need only look at the 3rd chapter of Genesis, where it is Satan himself who promises godhood to Eve in the Garden of Eden.
Do you know you told me? Yes, because you weren't there. So You're right. I wasn't there. I was kept in the lab. And one day, you will know. Murder. One day, you will know what actually happened. You're right, because you know what, Mom? And we all will stand there with everything into the light. You're absolutely right. He will convict the people who act in his name with pure blasphemy. Is this funny? This is funny? This is funny. You're laughing. Like, this is funny. How come your camera's on, Mom? You don't want to look at me in the eye? Why can't you look at me? Name with pure blasphemy. Is this funny? Name with pure blasphemy. Is this funny?
So you can see why the temple is so important to the Latter-day Saint. Because if he is worthy to go unto the temple and there receive the sacred ordinances and covenants and keep them, he can eventually grow into becoming a God himself.
Tell me who God the Father is to you.
He is like you and I, every human being on the face of the earth.
So is he a man?
Yes, he is.
How did he get to be God?
I don't know. Yeah, he's perfect in every way.
So if we are perfect, can we become like God?
Yes, ma'am.
Again, there's this idea that there's the right. I had this conversation with Mike Norton, new name Noah, about his actions too. When you're trying to reach the most amount of people, you certainly have to get bold to be noticed. You have to speak the truth. You have to have courage. Okay, but if you go too far, you risk undermining your own cause.
But I never undermined my own cause. And
no, let me just tell you, there's this idea of the backfire effect that if you push people too hard, you create resistance and they end up clinging tightly to their beliefs and re-entrenching and even holding tighter to their beliefs because you pushed them too hard. And so what if somebody said, man, Ed, showing up at the temple in your garments, that's overkill. That's going to turn people, that's going to give credible people a bad name. Credible people who try and criticize the church or educate people about the church, it's going to give them a bad name by you being so extreme. What would your reactions to that be?
I had one of the most productive and fruitful ministries at the temple that I've ever had in my career. And I had a tract that said, "Welcome to America's newest pagan temple." And it had a picture of Donnie and Marie Osmond on the cover. And I had the temple clothes on and had some signs, and I had about 20 people and for the cars coming into the parking lot. Every single car that came into the parking lot took our material. The buses that were bringing people in, people on the buses were asking us to come on the buses and give them all the material. And I've had people over the years say, I was so offended by you at the temple. But then when 7 years later, I went to the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled that stuff out, and I've given my life to the Lord. I did that as I did some of the other bold things. I was amongst others that went to almost all the temple openings and walked back and forth in the temple clothes with documentation that explained the actual temple ritual. And so what was I going to do? Put an ad in the newspaper, say, hey, that's a dangerous place. Don't you 20,000 people don't go in there. And 20,000 people got the truth and got the materials. And churches, the churches in the area around the temple helped us financially to print all the material. I had a booklet that I made out that was done by that was published by the American Bible Society called "And the Word Became Flesh," which I can send you a copy of, and for your listeners, watchers, your audience, it explains the gospel clearly. There isn't one statement of mine in there. It is 100% scripture, and published by the American Bible Society, our association. And
so you're basically saying the extreme tactics of showing up in the temple with your garments was kind of justified because it helped people see the light.
Well, I wasn't. It gave people a shock thing that made every single person who went to visit the temple want to know what it was about and take the material. And that what was the purpose of it. And I'm not apologizing for it. I thought it was a fantastic response. I could talk to you about temples in other states and other places, and the temple in Hawaii, and having a bunch of people come out and beat you up and scream at you and tromp on you and stuff like that. I felt that, and so many people have felt that you need to be bold about it. I'm not a quiet person. I'm a AAA, and
right.
And I'm going to go up there and stand in the face of the tiger. Okay, nobody else standing with me. I'm still going to be there, and I've been doing it for 44 years.
You sure have. The Anti-Defamation League of the B'nai B'rith basically said that what you were doing is, so this is a Jewish organization.
Religious pornography.
And invidious and defamatory. So they're basically saying you're being really disrespectful and discriminatory against people's religious beliefs. Stop attacking people's religious beliefs. It's mean and it's discriminatory. And
okay, they said that.
What's your argument against?
Well, I contacted them. They never interviewed me before, or never saw the film, and they never saw any of it before they put it out. When I went to New York City and challenged them, there was not a single evangelical Christian or a legal actual Orthodox Jew in the whole thing. But guess what? There was about 4 or 5 Mormons on that committee. There was not a single Christian. There was a Buddhist and a Baha'i and a few other people on there, and they refused to talk to me, and they had no backup. They had not seen.
So let me just ask you about their argument, which is, what about the argument that it's sort of religious discrimination? You're basically
they called it religious pornography.
Well, I'm just asking you, what about the argument that it's religious discrimination, that it's basically picking on people for their beliefs?
Yeah.
And that's mean and unkind and uncivil.
I guess.
No, what's your argument? What's your response to that?
My argument is that you're not going to stand up against darkness without bringing the light. And if they want to call the light offensive, then that's their problem, not my problem.
What if somebody were to say that's fundamentally un-Christ-like, that Jesus was about love and humility and patience and kindness?
The same guy that overturned all the tables in the temple and took a whip to the offenders and ran them out of the temple, that guy? Or the guy who called them they're a generation of vipers, or you're like your father, the devil, that guy?
I know, I don't like that Jesus either. Yeah, I just don't like that technique. I've never, and maybe you could argue I haven't had as big of an impact as you, but for me, there has to be a line where you show a certain amount of decency and respect. And I'm just saying that for me, I've always wanted to, I can't say I've always been perfect. There's plenty of people that hate me and that say awful things about me. say I've jumped the shark, that I shouldn't have even be interviewing you. But I do think there should be limits to, to showing disrespect, if not just for the fact that people deserve respect
into their lives. She said, since that time, my aunt and my uncle have led 65 extended family people to the Lord and set free. So in the middle of a meeting where they're screaming at me and telling me that I'm a liar and deceiver, the fruit and the seeds that brought them and 65 other people to the Lord, I can take the heat. But when I'm one-on-one with you or anybody else, if you were a Mormon and talking to me, you would never get, I'm not an angry person.